Myanmar's ruling military junta has not allowed international monitors in to oversee those elections, and CNN has not been allowed to cover the polls. But we are joined now on the phone by a journalist inside the country. So my question now, I know there's been some accusations about possible voter intimidation going on in Myanmar, but what would that intimidation be? Essentially, don't you have two parties who are both government junta-sponsored parties running against each other?
Well, that's essentially what you have. I mean, if you look at the sort of landscape of the opposition parties here in Myanmar, really most of them are widely underfunded. They don't have enough volunteers. The biggest opposition party that's actually contesting in these elections, which is called the NDF, is only contesting in about 16% of the constituencies. And I was traveling around the country in the past couple of days, and you could see armies of volunteers for the junta parties who are actually even telling people how to cast their ballot while, of course, also advertising their own parties. Now, of course, the opposition parties don't have the power to do that. So really, it seems to be the way a lot of international observers are saying that this is really a way for the junta to try and cement its grip on power, whereas many of the people who are actually running for the junta's party are ex-military members who have now traded in their military uniforms for a three-piece suit, really.
Yeah, just to remind everybody, 20 years ago, the last time that people were allowed to go to the polls for an election nationwide, Aung San Suu Kyi, she was arrested then, and she's been under house arrest for those 20 years. Her party ended up winning most of the seats in parliament, and the junta didn't recognize those seats. 20 years later, she's still behind bars, or at least behind bars, so to speak, in her house. Is there any optimism that she'll actually be released after these elections are held?
Well, there are some people who believe that she might be released. The big question here right now is how much influence does she still have? Because one of the things that's also a big problem for the opposition here in that country is that it is really fractured as well. Again, if you look at the largest opposition party, the NDF, that is really a splinter organization of Aung San Suu Kyi's party, the NLD, which said it wants to contest in these elections. And the big rift between a lot of these opposition groups is, should they contest in these elections or not? Some have said you have to boycott them because they're clearly unfair. Others say this could be a sort of fledgling way into democracy, and so they do have to contest in these elections. So the opposition in this country is deeply divided in itself. And really, when we saw the turnout today at the voting booths, I mean, it does seem at the polling stations as though there are a lot of people who are turning up. But you're absolutely right. The security is still very tight. So what the junta has basically been trying to do in the days running up to this election is, of course, put itself in a favorable position, but they're also quite tense as this day unfolds.
We appreciate the report. Thanks so much again. We're just speaking to a journalist who is inside Myanmar as the people go there to the polls for the first time in 20 years.